Thank you very much for coming to this session. My name is Mernaz. I will be moderating today's session. It's called Extension Intranet in SharePoint Online. It's going to be really exciting. I will begin by briefly introducing our wonderful presenters, followed by their presentation. And then if time permits, we will have some time at the end for QA. If your questions doesn't get answered, you can put that into the SharePoint user group. I'm going to share the link in the chat soon, and also it's going to be on the slide. Our presenters, we have also, just so you know, this session is going to be recorded, and the accessible version is going to be available in our website in a couple weeks. So our presenters are from Extension. We have Kevin Graham, IT Business Systems Strategist, and we have Diana Schneider, Software and Data Engineer. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mernaz. As she said, we're from Extension, and 30 minutes isn't really enough time to do a super deep dive. So I'm going to rush some of our history, but just to give you some context, we do hope to have opportunities for chat during the discussion. So when I'm talking, Deanna will be monitoring the chat, and when she's talking, I'll be monitoring. And then we do hope there's time at the end for some discussion. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. So for just a quick background on Extension, Extension was a previous, a separate university from UW-Madison. And in 2018, it was announced we were going to be merging with Madison. And this, of course, set a fire under everybody's projects. And so we had to come up with a plan to migrate everything that we had, all infrastructure, including SharePoint, from UW Extension colleges to UW-Madison. UW Extension is primarily a an outreach-oriented organization with offices in every county. So distance collaboration has been a huge part of what we need to do and support for our colleagues. So we used to have a SharePoint on-prem 2010 farm and some Office 365 sites in a different tenant, and well over 100 sites, not counting employee my sites and things like that. It was, of course, in a different domain. And there we had full admin access. I was the server admin. I set up all the services and all the sites. Slide. Yep. So when we were doing this, we basically had about 6 months to plan everything of all of the infrastructure, not just SharePoint, as I mentioned. We had just gone through a major reorg within Extension, and that was following a merger with UW colleges. So we'd been through a lot of changes, and this was just another curveball thrown at us. Of course, we knew some of the challenges were that DoIT, doesn't support SharePoint was the mantra at the time. And of course, the Office 365 environment, we don't have tenant admin rights. We've relied on a lot of classic customizations and workflows. And leadership, while all of this was going on, was busy with everything else to make the move to Madison happen. So we didn't have leadership to help provide input on what we did. On our win column, we have, between Deanna and I, 24 years combined experience with SharePoint. We already were familiar with using the ShareGate migration tool for doing migration, and I'll show you how that looks. Manifest at DoIT actually made doing a lot of the permissioning and service stuff easy. And at the same time that we were doing this, Microsoft was just rolling out the modern experience in SharePoint Online, and that actually gave us a lot of cool tools to work with. And of course, the reorg that we had just gone through was a blessing in disguise. So in true architecture lifecycle, if anybody's done any kind of information architecture and deployment and planning, you do all your planning, you do your building, you do your deployment, you adopt it, people are living in it, and then at some point, the technology has moved on or the organization has restructured, and so you basically end up burning it to the ground. And that's what we did. So next slide. Our biggest thing with the migration was this was an opportunity to clean house. So most of the old sites, when we went through them, were for organizational structures that weren't relevant anymore. So what we did is I archived everything. I used ShareGate to export all of the site content, which gave us backups of any documents and any lists that were already there. But for key critical sites, we actually created an archives site in Office 365 in the Madison tenant so that we could move some of those in there. We didn't worry that they looked good. We just worried that they were accessible so that if somebody came along and said, hey, I really needed this resource, where is it? We could at least give them access and they could go through it. For the rest of it, we used the ShareGate migration tool. Now, ShareGate migration tool, ideally, like all migration tools, works best if you have tenant admin rights. So we found the best way to work with it was that I would go and I would create a clean site at the destination, and this would give us a modern SharePoint site as opposed to what we had done in some test migrations. When we migrated stuff over, we were keeping the legacy SharePoint, and because Office 365 had been rapidly deprecating that, we were ending up with a lot of broken sites. So the best approach was to create a clean site at the destination. And then on this slide, you can see there's a couple different migration options, and the copy content only let us move then those documents and other materials into the site. And it can also copy list content. So we would recreate the list and migrate the content of that list. One of the key things that ShareGate gave us is the ability to actually resolve and preserve the user information. Now, keep in mind, we were moving from one tenant to another, completely different domains. So we have to create a user mapping list. And ShareGate supports doing this with just a simple CSV file of a source and destination values of who those users are. So that when we went through every single migration, it was able to preserve the creation dates and the users who did that, as opposed to if I just went in and created the site and manually copied those files in, it would change everything over to me as the owner of those files. For a few sites, go back, sorry, thanks. For a few sites, we did encounter an issue where modern sites don't support custom scripting, right? It's part of the larger shared environment, so they don't want the custom scripts easily run by just anybody. So there is a PowerShell command called set SPO site that allows customizing those pages. And then in a few situations, Sean from DoIT helped us do those migrations. All right, next slide. So the old architecture, anybody who's been using SharePoint for a while knows that it's a pretty complex architecture with farms and servers and web applications, and that there were 48 different default site templates. You can kind of see in the list there all the different kinds of site templates. Next slide. So in SharePoint Online, it's a lot simpler. There's basically only two site types to worry about. You have team sites, which are created either when you just go in and create a SharePoint site, you can pick team site. When you create a Microsoft group, it creates a team site for you. Or when you provision a site through Teams, it creates a team site for you. So that's your most common site. But it's really kind of geared towards small colleague collaboration as opposed to an intranet. So I'll talk later about how we sort of hybridized team sites into intranet sites. The other site type is a communication site. So this is really good for those just general informational navigational portals and those kind of things where it's really just an internal password protected website that just happens to be built in SharePoint. So instead of the deep structure of old SharePoint, where you had lots of subsites and nesting subsites and custom permission groups, in modern SharePoint, they're really reorganizing things into a flat structure, a flat architecture and using hubs, which were just introduced as we were moving in, to really kind of organize sites in a larger shared tenant. So what we have at the top is just our general extension home, which is our hub site. And then any site that we create is added to that. And one of the things I found in the architecture is that this provides a lot more flexibility. So you'll see we have multiple HR sites, one that's the main home site, one for our professional development efforts, one for our performance management. And what that gives us is the flexibility to kind of things like PTC come along, we can spin up a new site. And then when that's no longer a major project for our HR office, we can just remove that site. And we didn't have to go and re-architect the whole HR main site. And of course, programs and teams and all of those can go in there. And because they're all part of the hub, you can query across just those sets of sites. So this is what our Intranet Home hub site looks like. I'm a little sad that the communications site template didn't come along at the outset when we were doing this. So I ended up doing a hybridized team site, which is why you see that left kind of blank navigation bar. But the really key thing with the hub site is things like at the top, there's a global navigation bar. And this global navigation is normal to any SharePoint site. You have your global nav and then you have your local nav. But this global nav now as the hub propagates to every other site in your network. And so anytime I want to add a site, I can just click on either create a site from my hub, and it's automatically added to the hub. Or if somebody else creates a site, they can add me as a site owner, and I can go into their site information and add the hub site. This is something that basically it requires one PowerShell script to run. So I just had reached out to Sean Cannon. He was doing all of our assistance at DoIT for our SharePoint migration. And he was able to just run that PowerShell, and it has a few settings. In this case, he granted me the admin privileges of adding sites to it. There's a setting that also would let you add anybody can add a site to a hub, but because it was new and we weren't sure we wanted to open that up, it's just limited to me. Another thing on the hub site with the navigation to be aware of is that any child site, even though it's not a sub-site, it's part of your hub. Any of those sites that are affiliated with that hub basically inherit that navigation, which means it comes with the hub site's permissions. So the hub site has to have the most open permissions of your intranet sites, so that when somebody goes to one of the sites in your network, they're able to see the navigation. Otherwise, they'll get an error screen. Next slide. All right, so if any of you have done Teams and you've seen the team site that it creates, you kind of can get an idea of what I'm talking about here, where you have that team site, but now it's just that team. How do we make it visible to everyone in the intranet? What we did is we created the team site, but then I go in, and in the permissions, there's a difference between SharePoint permissions and team group permissions. So when you're doing team group permissions, those people are added through the interface, either through Outlook, through the SharePoint basic members, or through Teams. And that's anybody who can actually work on the site and share documents and all of that. Whereas in an intranet, you might want everybody to be able to read things. So in the SharePoint permissions, what we were able to do is go into the advanced permissions and the SharePoint visitors group and add a global group, which Deanna will talk about in a bit. One of the other things that we quickly encountered was that any documents shared then via Teams, for instance, were propagating into search that anybody in our intranet was able to find them. So the team wasn't able to have sort of their own documents. And instead of doing sort of what's common, having two separate sites where one is your public site and one is your internal team site, we came up with this hybrid approach where I took the team documents, the site's documents, the default documents folder, and that was just for the team. And then I created a new document library called Site Documents, and that one is open to everyone in the intranet. And the default behavior of SharePoint is that if you don't have permission to see something, it actually trims. It's what's called security trimming. So in the navigation, all the things listed in the orange box there just disappear. So that things like Teams, team documents, and the calendar aren't visible to people who aren't part of the team, but they can still see the rest of the website and the documents that have been shared publicly. So this is a nice way to hybridize team sites as an intranet site. All right, one of the other things that we quickly did, we used to do this even before we merged with Madison, but it kind of felt even more important as we came into Madison, is establishing naming conventions for our sites. And so any school and division is probably going to have something like a strategic planning, maybe supervisor toolkit from their HR office, some kind of professional development, maybe climate change, ed tech, all of these different things could be relevant in any school or division. So what we do is we just prepend it with our EXT dash. And what this does is it tells our staff that's part of our intranet. But it also does things like lets Sean Cannon at DoIT, who looks at all these sites, be able to say, oh, those are extension sites. We know that that's theirs. So it's just a good practice to kind of get into a naming convention. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Deanna to talk about some of our security planning.
Yeah, so we have generally relied on using Manifest to create groups of individuals who are part of extension. So we have an all extension intranet group that includes everyone based off of their UDDS code. Division of Extension is A47. So we have everyone who's got an appointment in A47. We also, because of our cooperative relationship with counties, have a lot of people of interest and some special POI codes for those people of interest. So we automatically include them as well. And then we have a few people who have sort of joint appointments that don't have a POI or who have some affiliation with Extension in some other way. We add those as manual affiliates. We put all of those into a manifest group, and then we publish that manifest group to Active Directory, so that we can then use it in SharePoint. When you publish it into Active Directory, it gets published with the GUID from the manifest group. So it is not a user-friendly name that you're going to be looking for when you're trying to share permissions in SharePoint or assign permissions to it in SharePoint. So you kind of have to know to go to manifest first, grab the GUID, come back in. So what we typically then will do is just make a SharePoint group that contains that, so that people who are, if they need to share something with everyone in an intranet, they use the SharePoint group, which contains the manifest group via the AD user group. Unfortunately, one of the limitations of that is that when you create a team, for instance, or an actual Office 365 group, if you use anything that's been published from Manifest to AD, it will look at the individuals within that group at the time of publication or the time of creation of the group or the team, and it will add their individual accounts as opposed to sticking to that kind of like group account. So then if people leave or new people come in, it's not going to stay in sync. So we typically have somebody whose job is to manually add people or remove people when we're dealing with teams, and we just use the manifest to AD push for SharePoint group security permissions. We make all of our intranet sites readable by that extension all intranet group. And as Kevin mentioned before, we have used the everyone except external users for our top level hub site. So if we invite somebody who isn't part of that extension all intranet group, for instance, somebody from central HR or somebody at the upper levels of leadership to be part of one of those child sites of our hub sites, they will still be able to access the site so that they don't get security trimmed because of that included global navigation from the hub site. We're hoping, fingers crossed, that maybe ATP and interop updates like fix some of the issues with manifest not being able to sync well with SharePoint Office 365 groups and teams, but we don't know if that's really going to happen. The other thing we do from a security perspective is that we use service accounts to separate our individual employee rights from our administrative access rights. So both Kevin and I and Eric at our help desk have service accounts that we add to every site that we create in SharePoint. We do this so that if one of us is not around, there's always backup for somebody that can log into that site and do any support or maintenance for our users. We try really hard to do all that first level support so that DoIT isn't getting bombarded with people who are asking SharePoint questions, since it's not a tool that they really want to support directly. So we always want to make sure that somebody in Division of Extension can help people. But we don't want to, when we're logged in as our individual accounts, see all of the content from all of our sites. It's not appropriate for us to see all of that content. Microsoft Graph is really good at surfacing things that are new or things that you might be interested in. And if we had our individual accounts in all of those sites, it would be pushing all that to us and saying, hey, did you see this? You'd get those emails, you'd see all the things that you don't necessarily need to see. So we use those administrative service accounts for all of that. We also do all of our workflows with a separate service account that's not individually tied to any one of us, so that any of us can use that service account to log in and make changes to a workflow if necessary. Speaking of workflows, workflows are part of the Microsoft Power Platform. And the Power Platform is a citizen developer platform that Microsoft has really put a lot of resources behind. It involves a number of different tools: Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents. Unfortunately, we do not, as a general rule, Madison does not license Power BI or Power Virtual Agents, so we can't use those. But we make great use of both Power Apps and Power Automate. Power Apps is a tool that allows you to generate little standalone web applications, or the way we use it more commonly is we use it to modify SharePoint list forms. So when people are adding and editing data in a SharePoint list, there's the standard list out of the box that just shows you every single field that's available. They've now added a few little conditional things that you can do, and a couple of ways you can modify that using just the out of the box SharePoint tools. But Power Apps gives you a lot more functionality for editing those SharePoint list forms. For instance, you can have a lookup list in your SharePoint list. You can have one list that's referencing another SharePoint list. And using Power Apps, you can have additional data in that secondary list that then limits what fields what options are in the drop-down list if you're using that as a lookup list. So we use that a lot. We also use it a lot to hide certain fields. So we do a lot of workflows, like approval workflows in SharePoint. And you don't want all of your users to be able to, for instance, change the value in the approved column from what it is at the beginning, which is usually pending, to approved, unless they're the person who has the rights to do that. So by customizing those list forms, we can prevent people from changing the data that they shouldn't be able to change. Oh, sorry. We also use Power Automate to do workflows, and there's a number of different types of workflows that you can do in Power Automate. We tend to do 3 different kinds. Automated workflows, and those are ones that are triggered automatically by some sort of an event. Typically in SharePoint, there's about 10 different events that can trigger them. It's things like a new list item being added, or a list item being updated, or a document being added to a document library, or something being changed in a document, and on and on. An example of an automated workflow that we might do is that when somebody, so you can also do based not off of SharePoint lists. So one of example is that we have an account that has an email address, and we listen to that email address with a Power Automate workflow, automated workflow. And if it comes in with a certain subject line and it has an attachment, we read the attachment, look at the data in the attachment, and write a row into a SharePoint list for every value in the CSV that's attached. An instant workflow is a workflow that's triggered manually some way. What we typically do there, and we learn this the hard way, and don't make our mistake, when a new list item is added, if you wanted to do an approval workflow, for instance, you could write the flow that it just kicks off automatically when the new list item is added. Or you could write it as an instant flow that requires the user to click a button to set that approval off. The reason that you want them to click the button to set that approval off is that if the approval gets rejected at some place with some feedback that they need to go and change something, if you wrote your original workflow as an automated workflow for when the item got created, they can't edit it and resubmit the workflow. So we do most of our workflows now as these instant workflows that our users have been trained to look for the big button that says start workflow, and then they can get that kicked off and then still have the ability to go back and edit things if necessary. Which isn't to say that we don't do automated ones. We also control permissions a lot with automated workflows. So we might have on that same list item multiple workflows, an automated one to take away permissions while the approval is happening, and an automated one to give permissions back if it gets rejected, but the actual approval process would be an instant workflow. And finally, we do scheduled cloud flows, and those are ones that run on some sort of schedule. For instance, we have one that runs every week that looks at a list, reads all the items in the list. If any of the items are past a certain amount of time since they've last been reviewed, it sends off an email to the person who should be reviewing that item, asks them to come in and do some work to maintain the freshness of that. So the other thing we really wanted to do was make it easy for people to access our intranet. So what we've done is we've created a widget in My UW, and when people ask us where's the intranet, we say, well, you log in at My UW at my.wis.edu, and you look for the Division of Extension Resources widget, which if you're in A47 will be automatically added to your homepage, and you click the intranet button. You too can create a widget for yourself if you want to at my.wis.edu/widget creator, and it involves working with DoIT directly. There isn't sort of an automated process. You still have to work with folks from DoIT on that. And I'm going to throw it back to Kevin for some thanks.
Yep. So, this was a fast rush through, our history and how we made the migration happen. And that migration really was successful in special thanks to some folks that do it. So Beth Wint is the Office 365 service lead. She's the one who sort of like greenlit us being able to do this in SharePoint Online when DoIT was saying we don't support SharePoint. Sean Cannon is the technical lead for Office 365, and he's been there all along to really help us run things like the PowerShell that we might need to do, or to work with us on how service accounts needed to be set up. John Miner was instrumental in us planning and getting our manifest and identity management stuff set up. And then Andrew Cunningham was our project manager for everything in the migration, not just SharePoint. So just want to send out a special thanks to them. And so we're running short on time, as I was worried about, but we do have something. Sean Cannon actually set this up, and I'm a co-moderator of a SharePoint Power Users group in Teams. And you can see we have a short go.wis.edu URL there, as well as a QR code. And you are welcome to join that and ask us any questions. I may do a reprisal of this in a more informal context where we can do a deep dive and talk about some of this stuff. So any questions? So I see Eric is saying that, Eric, your department's bespoke intranet is in need of a refresh. And yep, so the lack of DoIT support. So basically DoIT supports SharePoint. I've had many conversations with Sean about this. Sean, feel free to jump in. The key element is if you are capable of, setting up sites, anybody can set up a site, anybody can create a team. Sean is willing to work with you to do the, small things like implement a hub, right? But there's some planning that needs to happen and some approvals from DoIT because there's a limit of 2,000 hubs in the tenant. And if everyone created a lot of hubs, it would be easy within a single school to, create separate hubs. It could use up the hub limit. So there's some look at, what those rules need to be in governance. But overall, I would say, Sean is willing to have people, adopt SharePoint. He's willing to help them, but it's something where DoIT can't basically go in and build sites for you and do, maintenance on those sites for you. So if you're feeling comfortable at doing, the maintenance yourself, and it's just you need a few things here and there, yeah, I would say it's a safe bet to go with SharePoint.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Deanna. We ran out of time, unfortunately. So people, if you have questions, please join that group and keep the conversation going. Many thanks to our speakers and many thanks to our attendees. And there are other wonderful sessions. Stick around today, tomorrow, to see what else is going on. Thank you. You have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.